anything that smacks of a shortage of, a limit of, a dearth of life. Because God is the source of life and He thrives in life. That's why people who don't understand the Jewish view of why we cherish life so much, because life, even if you don't do anything, contrary to what I intimated before, that life itself is nothing unless you do with life what you're supposed to do, I'm going to modify that and qualify that, that life itself has intrinsic value. The mere existence of a soul, a godly energy in this world, is already a positive thing, not enough. It's the beginning, not the end. But it does have intrinsic value. So we're thanking God for giving us that ability to be fully alive. When we're asleep, our mind does not work. What makes the human being unique? The human being's ability to think clearly. When we're asleep, we lose that ability. And as I said before, that's a symptom of golus, of exile, where we can't think straight. And even in exile, God knocks on our door and tries to awaken us and says to us, wake up. Don't stay asleep. Recognize that there are forces that try to keep you from seeing reality. When you look at the world, you're not looking at the world correctly. It's divine energy that exists within everything. Everything is divine. And we're soon going to be able to behold this very clearly as they did in the temple. But even before the temple is built, we have to try to create that sanctuary, which means to create an environment in which we see God's presence in everything. And how do we do that? We do that, of course, through meditation, through prayer, reflection, by seeing the divine providence and everything, the fortuitous events that happen in this words, remove sleep from my eyes. Those are 3 words in Hebrew. In English, it's 6 words. In Hebrew, it's 3. Mavir Sheina Me'enoi. If you take the initials of those 3 words, if you read it backwards, it spells Moshe.
Hashem.
Right, Hashem. That's right. But it spells Moshe. What does Moses have to do with removing sleep? So one of the Hasidic authors, known as Rabbi Bachovsky, says that exile is compared to sleep, which is something that we discussed before. How do we get out of exile? Moses, it says, was the first redeemer of the Jewish people, and he is the final redeemer. Mashiach embodies everything that Moses stands for. Moses personally, physically, will not be the Messiah, but the Mashiach, who redeems us from exile, physical and spiritual exile, is an embodiment of Moses in every sense. He possesses Moses' soul. And therefore, who removes the sleep? It's Moshe, the Moses. In every generation, there are Jewish leaders who are compared to Moses. The leaders, their job is not to be politicians. A Jewish leader is not there to have power. A Jewish leader is there to liberate. How do you liberate? By awakening people, sounding the shofar to awaken them. And that's what Moses did, and that's what Mashiach will do. Another thing he says there, Rabbi Bachovsky, that the word Shena, if you spell it with the letter Yud, adds up to 365. Now, what is it corresponds to the number 365? Most people would say the days of a year, of a solar year. But it also happens to be the number of negative commandments, of the commandments in the Torah that tell us what we're not allowed to do, the do-nots, the proscriptive commandments. There were 365 of those. And it's Moses, and the Moses in every generation, and the Moses within us, because each one of us, the Tanya says, has a spark of Moses. That Moses has the power to eliminate our transgressions, to get rid of the transgressions. And where do transgressions come from? Yes, there are some people who are hateful, spiteful, people who are rebellious, but most people do the wrong things because they are sleepwalking. They're asleep. They don't realize what they're doing. They don't realize the consequences. They don't realize what makes it wrong. It's a state of sleep, spiritual sleep, and it's the Moses of the generation and the Moses within us that enables us to avoid those transgressions. A contemporary author explains that the verse in the Psalms, it says, Rabos machshavos belev ish. There are many thoughts in the heart of man. The words in the heart of man numerically adds up to the word Moshe. And he says like this, that we have many thoughts. Our thoughts go in every direction. How do we know where we're really at? Because we're fragmented. We're pulled in many directions. How do we know who the real me is? My real personality, my real essence. I can't say this is a foolproof method, but it's an indicator. When you wake up in the morning, what is your first thought? If your first thought is coffee, or if your first thought is, what am I going to do at work today, or when am I going to go on my vacation, or anything else, I'm not talking about negative thoughts, but just mundane thoughts, then you're not necessarily in the right place. Your first thought should be, what am I going to do to make my existence in this world validated? That I fulfill my purpose for which God created me? How do I get closer to God? How do I express my relationship with God? How do I go back to the original source of this blessing? How do I search for the sanctuary, to rebuild the sanctuary, and to pay my debts to God, to serve my God, my Creator? If that's your thought, Belev Ish, in your heart, that's Moses. Then you know that Moses is guiding you. If, on the other hand, you have Rabos Machshavos, many other thoughts, because you haven't really awakened, your eyes are still half asleep, or quarter asleep, or whatever level, sleep or slumber, that means that you're not in touch. That's not the real you. That's not where you should be, where we should be heading. Our first thought is, if you again take King David's example, is to give God a home. God, as strange as it sounds, is homeless. We care so much about homelessness. I don't know if people have done as much, or there's as much publicity about helping people in so many different ways. But homelessness somehow is the worst scourge of society, that people are homeless. And there's some truth to that, because God in exile is homeless. When God had the temple built in Jerusalem, God's presence was felt in this world. God felt comfortable. It's his home. Exile means not just that we were driven out of our land and we suffered subjugation to so many different hostile nations, and we were poor, and we were deprived, and we were persecuted, and all the horrible things that go along with exile. That's all true. But the essence of exile is God's homelessness, as it were. And God says, I want a home. Give me a home. And that's our first thought, because how could we feel comfortable? As King David said, I can't go into my own home. How can I be comfortable if God doesn't have a home? If we try to understand that a little bit more deeply, God exists within all of us. That's our soul, is a part of God. Our soul is homeless. So how could I feel comfortable going physically into a home when my soul doesn't have a home? So that's the first thought that should enter our minds when we wake up in the morning, in one form, one form or another. Then we know we're in the right place. Then we know that our soul is close to being heard by our conscious mind, and we're ready to continue with the next part of the blessing, which we'll discuss, God willing, next week. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again next week.